Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining me on another episode focused on the COVID-19 crisis and its impact on our industry. I've had some really great conversations so far, and I hope that they have been helpful and that this series of episodes, which I don't know when it's going to end, but as long as it's still useful, I think we should probably keep doing these. But I hope it's been helpful. Yeah. This week, we've got some really good ones coming up. Later in the week, you're going to hear from John King, one of the owners of Walkie Talkie Coffee in Canton, Ohio. And then you're going to hear also from Janine Niyonzima Oroyan, who is the president of JNP Coffee. It's a Burundi coffee importer and exporter. We're going to be talking about the impact that has on the farmers and what they're doing as importers in this one of the world's, I think the world's poorest country of Burundi. So this is really going to be a good week for this content, and I hope you tune in for those as well. This episode, we are going to be talking with Maxwell Mooney, frequent guest of the show now. Maxwell Mooney is the owner of Narrative Coffee in Everette, Washington. You know, since the beginning, Maxwell has been a leading voice and a great example of someone who's leading with thorough preparation, intuition, and just really clear-headed way. And in this conversation today, we're going to be talking to Maxwell about how everything unfolded there in Everette for Narrative Coffee and how they went about preparing for and executing their plans. Some of the planning that he had been doing beforehand to prepare for what he felt was a coming recession, which, you know, here we are. We're going to be talking about that as well. Leadership in the midst of exhaustion as an owner. And Maxwell had gone through a ton of stuff in the middle of this pandemic and yet has prioritized hospitality and leadership. We'll be talking in depth about that, as well as just the tough calls that they have to make as a company for safety. And at the time of this recording, they decided to close their doors and had previously been operating as a curbside pickup, as a lot of us are. We're going to talk about the call to close the doors there and kind of managing the emotional impact that this has on staff and customers as well. Not to mention just you as a leader. So I have such great respect for Maxwell's voice in the industry and his intuition when it comes to things like this. So let's get right to the interview. Here now is Maxwell Mooney of Narrative Coffee. Maxwell, thank you so much for coming on the show to share your story. I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, happy to be back. Thanks for the invite, Chris.
Yeah. So, things are, you have now voluntarily closed Narrative. And how long has it been since that has happened?
Oh man, I think it was March 22nd. Yeah, March 22nd. So a little over 2 weeks now, or a week and a half, I guess.
2 weeks. Wow. So when we're talking about voluntarily closing the space, this is a decision that came at the end of a long string of very, I would say, progressive efforts to pivot and adjust your model to what was happening to continue to serve your community. And being in Everette, you were in the epicenter of everything as it kind of unfolded in the U.S. I'd say that Narrative was sort of the leader in, say, people would look at your Instagram and what you're posting and say, that's a great idea. We're going to do that. It is so shocking to just kind of think back to how fast things progressed. It started with your honor bar, like on your Instagram, I saw like you're just posting about, hey, we've got this, we're closed for an event. And then the next one was like, we're closing the honor bar because of this novel coronavirus. And then it just like got lit up and it just went crazy. So how aware were you, like right before the honor bar closed? You said that you all were paying attention to how this was progressing, and what the mayor was saying to do, et cetera. How did this all kind of break down for you? And when did it get really serious?
Well, the very first case in the U.S. was in Everette, less than a mile from my shop at the local hospital called Providence. It happened to land on my birthday. So I was aware of all of that, paying attention. I'd heard some suggestions that this could be very serious, and some epidemiologists had said that it was a pretty serious thing. So it was something that I was looking at fairly seriously and wanted to have a good handle on, but it sounded like this person who had gotten it directly from China. He was in Wuhan, had come back to the U.S., was really careful because he was aware that he was in Wuhan and was aware of what was going on, and so he was extra cautious and actually had self-isolated prior to coming up with symptoms. And so this person had, once they showed symptoms, they called the hospital and talked him through what was going on with himself, and they had had an isolation like room in the hospital that was completely separated from all of the other rooms. That was on its own ventilation system. It had its own ventilation, or it had its own air filters. It was fully quarantined from everything. And so he was the first person to use that. I guess they had built that with the Ebola outbreak, and so he was the first person to christen that room, essentially.
Wow.
And so he went in to that, and then about 2.5 weeks later, he was fully recovered. So they let him out. So that was something I was paying attention to. And then the moment there was a student at Jackson High School, which is a high school down in Bothell, just a little bit south of us, whose, I believe his dad got it. And it was the first case of community spread. And that was the moment where I was like, okay, this is serious. This isn't going to go well, because it was out in the community. And I had already learned about the gestation period for this thing in terms of, the time at which you have the virus and can spread it to the time at which you show symptoms, and it's a solid week. That was the point where I was like, okay, this is pretty serious. So at that point, we started thinking through some plans and some options, started formulating some sorts of game plans, and kind of went through some processes, thinking through some things to do there. I want to say that was early February. Now, that was already in the midst of a crazy time. You mentioned earlier an event that was happening. That was actually my sister's wedding.
No.
That happened at the shop. And so that was one of many, many things that had ended up happening in the 3 months previous. It was one of those things where you're trying to monitor a very serious situation in the midst of trying to juggle 55 million other things. And so, yeah, it was kind of interesting. But one thing that was actually really helpful was a post on the Baristas Guild of Washington State page, where Jill Kellen and a couple of other people had kind of started asking questions about like what people were thinking about doing, what their plans were. And so that was a really helpful post, just kind of engaged with the coffee community, the kind of people sharing their thoughts and feelings about things. So that was helpful. And then I took a night and just deep dove on numbers and modeling and kind of trying to get as much of a handle on this thing as I could before we had a staff meeting where we kind of went through and talked through the processes of potential changes that we were going to have to be moving through, and kind of our game plan for how we were going to do that. Yeah, and kind of that pivot and hustle that we were deeply engaged in. And to be completely honest with you, from a business perspective, was working out quite well. We were Seattle has a lot of tech businesses in it, and a lot of those tech businesses sent their employees to work from home earlier on. So they were already working from home, and so that kind of cleared Seattle out of a lot of people. And so Seattle was getting really hard hit economically up until I think it started the first week of March. I want to say is when they sent everyone home. Mm-hmm. So we didn't see any downturn. We were maybe 4 or 5% and down, and even people in Everette, were down more than that. And so I really feel blessed in the way that our community, continued to show up. And I think because we were so vocal so quickly about the process, that helps people feel a little bit more comfortable. But we also just had people who were commuting down to Seattle every day who are now at home and could kind of go visit places. So I think that had some impacts too. But, we didn't really see any downturn at all until the dine-in ban happened. At that point, we saw some downturn. That's when we moved to a drive-through like curbside kind of pickup situation. And that definitely brought things down a lot. But we were starting to pick back up. The Saturday before we closed, I think we had like an 1850 day, which our average day was like around that. So it was a Saturday, so it was lower than it should have been, but it was like in the manageable range for us. So we're doing okay. It was we closed for other reasons. So
right. Well, when I look at how things progressed, and when we were chatting about this a little bit before recording, you had mentioned that you had a bunch of plans. We sat down with the staff to come up with a bunch of scenarios and plans, and you were saying how you kind of blew through those when things started to rapidly change. It started with the honor bar being closed, and then you started pulling stock back from the shelves, so there's less handling of it. Having lots of different plans in place in contingency, it seems like a pretty wise move. I mean, but at a certain point, you probably just like ran out of of plans.
Yeah, I think we had. Let me see if I can pull it up so I can take a look. We had like I think 7 stages of everything that we were planning on doing, and so we moved through stage 4 or 5 up to that point really fast, and then it was like from there it was just like what do we have left to do? Like close down the lobby and then close down the shop. And so we ended up moving through those as well. So yeah.
Well, I mean, when you're talking about these plans, we're talking about something that is not uncommon for coffee bars to do because you've already got standard operating procedures. You're adjusting those to the new context, but what it doesn't account for is the emotions that are tied up in the midst of that the staff are feeling, because you're going to tell somebody to do dishes a different way any other day of the year, it's not going to cause emotional strain. But when you tell them, oh, it's because there's a pandemic, it's quite different. And so at what point did, and maybe this was immediate, but at what point did it become more than just switching operational standards and having to really manage the emotional impact of this on your staff and your customers?
From the very get-go, I was aware, after doing some deep dive on it, I was coming to grips with how serious the thing is, and realizing like, okay, this is not normal. There's not really any best practices. Like Simon Sinek hasn't written a book on how to run a business in freaking the middle of a pandemic, like for whatever reason, business leaders are kind of mysteriously silent on the subjects of pandemics. And so it's kind of one of those things where like, okay, like this is gonna be different. I don't know the right course. I have no idea. What I do know is our values. And so like whenever we met, that was the first thing we did, is just like talk through like, what are our values? Like, what are the things that we stand on? What are the things we've talked about since before the business was started? And then for my employees, it's like since the second you were interviewed to being hired, what are the things that we've kind of continued to talk about? And it's like, we have 4 values, and those are what's going to drive us and help us make our decisions. And so, I think that was helpful. And I think having a plan that I communicated clearly was helpful. Sometimes leaders have a desire to, sometimes it's in my opinion, it can be misguided, but it's misguided intention to like shelter their people from things they don't need to know as some means of like trying to protect them. And for me, I don't really, that's not my style. I would much rather just share with people exactly what situations are going on. That's as long as they can know about it, and equip them with as much information as I have. So that way we can all kind of talk through things together. And so, it's like I went through and just broke down the numbers for the staff on like our business, how the business is doing, kind of what cushion we have for if we were to close down, like how much money do we have in the bank that we can float on until we can reopen, and just like sat down and talked through it with everyone. And so that was kind of part of my process of trying to help people cope emotionally, or at least have a handle on it, so that way it wouldn't add another layer of emotional strain on top of all the uncertainty going on in the rest of the world.
Do you find that was successful? I mean, in that they reacted with positivity toward that kind of openness?
Yeah. I had multiple people say, thank you for sharing this. This helps me immensely. So I do think that that was helpful for, at least for my staff. But I know my people really well. And I know that most of them would have preferred to have had it that way. I don't know if that's a universal thing for every human out there. There are maybe some people who are like, I don't want to know. Just tell me if I need to show up to work or not. So, if you have people like that on your team, then obviously don't take that I wouldn't recommend taking that kind of approach. But I know my people would really want to know like the game plan and what our next steps would be if things started changing rapidly.
Right. So when we're talking about, having that kind of openness with them and sharing with them about the financial runway that you've got as a business, it really does put things into perspective to help them understand your situation. They can empathize with what you're going through as an owner, which I think is sometimes when you don't have that, it breeds a lot of like secret animosity between baristas and owners when there's not that kind of a trust.
Definitely. Yeah, I've seen that many, many times throughout my career as, both a barista and a business owner.
So now you have gotten to this point where you're iterating, you're communicating with your staff. Your customers are responding to this as well, of course. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how it was to practice hospitality in the midst of these altered states of narrative coffee.
For me, hospitality, it was honestly like that's our first value. Hospitality is paramount, and that was really what drove so much of our discussion was how do we best practice hospitality for our guests and our community. And so that was kind of what drove a lot of these decisions. And sometimes hospitality doesn't always just mean like being super friendly and happy and bubbly at all times. Sometimes it looks like getting in the weeds with people and like just like looking someone in the eyes and saying like, this sucks, but we're going to get through it. I after like things got really serious and there was like a dine-in ban and like some stay-at-home kind of things had come into play. There were definitely a lot more of those discussions early on. We were a little bit ahead of the curve as far as like businesses that were responding. It's like we rolled out a number of measures before the health district had sent us any info or suggestions. We had already rolled out plans and things that were already more substantial than what the health department was asking us to do. And so we had a few guests look at that with a little bit of derision, Really? So that was an interesting experience of like having to like communicate to our staff of like, hey, like there are going to be people who are skeptical, and that's okay. But if they're going to be belligerent and step outside of if they're going to step outside of the protocols that we've established for them, that's the point where we're going to ask them to leave because they're endangering the community, and they might be skeptical now, but give them 3 weeks, and people come around.
Lo and behold. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was kind of the situation. And that was one of those decisions that's like, do I have a crystal ball? No. I don't know for sure. Maybe I'll be wrong in 3 weeks. I hope I'm wrong. But, I'd like looking at the numbers and the sources for this data is pretty clear to me of like, okay, this is pretty serious and it's not happening yet, but it will. And so that was kind of, one of those things where practicing hospitality for my guests looked like looking at spreadsheets and looking at figures and modeling and trying to figure out what's going on about, like becoming a quick armchair epidemiologist.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I was just like, I need to understand what's going on so that I know how to plan for this.
What's behind that mindset? And in particular, I'm thinking, you take that extra measure. And I think we've all seen narrative take some measures that are, in non-pandemic times have been they've been, I guess, preemptive. And it seems like this is no different in that you are thinking ahead to say, what's the best decision I could make? And it seems like safety would be the number one concern. Whereas I think a lot of, you talk to a different owner, maybe they're a little bit more maybe faced with even the same numbers. No, well, we're not going to do anything until we absolutely have to. So you voluntarily put yourself under potential derision. You're preemptive in it, but what's the value you're operating on that made you do that versus just waiting it out and being forced to take action?
Yeah. Again, I think it's that first value of ours, that hospitality is paramount. I think hospitality really drives everything that we try to do. And I think I've actually probably talked about this before on your show. But hospitality, the root word is hostess, which means stranger or enemy, and it's the exact same root word that exists in hospitals for the word hospital. It's the same root word in Latin, and so hospitality first and foremost is about caring for the other. It's about saying that their value is meaningful to you and that you want to treat it with the respect that is deserved. And so for me, if people aren't safe and they're not okay, then you can't really take care of them, And so if you're putting people in danger, you're fundamentally making people from friends into strangers or enemies, or, you're acting toward them in a way that could bode them harm, which is really, the exact opposite of what we're trying to do. So for me, that was very much kind of the motivating factor of like, where are we sitting at in terms of how we're engaging with our community? Are we helping our community? Are we asking our community to consider each other and modeling that with how we're choosing to conduct ourselves? Or are we throwing out our own life preservers and trying to, make our own thing float? And that was ultimately kind of the crux of why we ended up deciding to close, though we're considered an essential business, is just that, when looking at the data and looking at what was going on, it was abundantly clear that people needed to be staying home. And it just felt so incongruous to me to ask people to stay home and then also come out and support my business by coming out and buying coffee, getting food and taking it all to go and all of that. And so that was ultimately kind of, we had a couple people who I know personally, or they told us that they were COVID positive, come through our curbside pickup.
What?
And that was the straw that broke the camel's back for me, of just by trying to support me, because that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to support our business, and they were trying to be helpful. And in the midst of their life's craziness, they were trying to do something good and helpful for others. But in the process of doing that, they put a lot of people at risk. And so while those intentions were good, the impact of that was such that it required action on my part. At that point, I felt morally complicit if I was to continue staying open and create a very strong potential for community spread through my coffee bar, which is, like it or not, we see a lot of people every day.
Oh, that's true.
So it comes with a level of responsibility, that we're trying to take seriously. And again, I don't, our situation is different than every other business's situation, even in the same cities. It's like even in the same town as us, like in the same downtown, our situation is going to be a little bit different than every other place. So I don't really have any animosity or judgment towards anyone doing anything differently than what we're doing. Yeah, it's just kind of ultimately what we needed to do for our business.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to look out into the community and see. There's a lot of very gung-ho, let's stay open as long as we can. We're saving the business, et cetera. And it's not simply a money grab. It's just, what are we going to do if we lose this business and all these jobs?
Totally.
And then mindset, of course, you hear this around the media, like the disease worse than the result of our actions. And so there's like, I don't know, maybe like 75% of people who you look out there and they're like, well, we're going to do whatever we can to stay open. And then 25% that you are in, I think this is not like a statistic. It's just, like, no, we're going to close. So it's hard to be in the camp where you feel like you're doing something wrong by staying open, or you want to feel cheered on for doing it. So I guess it really does have to be something you're cool with as an individual business and owner.
Yeah. And to be clear, like I was very much like, we're going to take every precaution that we can, but we're going to stay open and, just try to provide some sense of normalcy for our staff or for our community, it's like, and our staff. But, in the midst of like something like this, like the normal comforts are that much more meaningful. So that was very much my perspective. It was just those couple of things that brought my decision making into a different light that really were the final pieces that kind of changed things for us in a lot of ways. But it's like I do think it's interesting. So many people are say like, oh, these companies are just trying to get rich, and it's like these companies are literally just trying to survive. Like the fact that we were even able to close is a privilege. If we didn't make a profit last year, we would not have been able to afford to close. We would have had to stay open. I would have had to let people go, in terms of like, I don't know if I'll ever have a job for you again, And so it's like the fact that we were able to just cease operations and have enough in the bank to float us and get us through, that's a privilege and something that I don't take lightly. So I really don't like I don't think that my choice was the universal choice that everyone ought to be making. I think it was the right choice for our business at the time at which I needed to make it. Hopefully history will show me that I was right for our business. But I have absolutely no qualms with anybody else who's choosing to do anything differently. And I really appreciate seeing some of the hustle out there, like Augie's. I love that company so much. I love Austin. Everybody who's there is just, they're all incredible humans, and they put out this extra large latte where they pre-made a bunch of iced lattes basically and just put them in half-gallon and gallon jugs.
Yeah, you see that popping up all over now, right?
Yeah. A lot of people have followed suit, and I saw who else is doing that? I saw Onyx is doing that, and who else have I seen doing that?
I know locally there's some people here. Center Gas Coffee has started doing it, and
oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a great idea. And if I was open right now, I'd be doing it.
Sure. Anything to, bring in the customers and serve the community, because it's not just about like, just serving them the normal things. Why would you sell that much of a latte or cold brew? Because you actually are encouraging them to stay home, so you don't have to go and get more.
Totally. Yeah, that's exactly. I think that's a really amazing act of hospitality, and also finding a creative solution. So I think that's awesome, and I'd love it. Like, I want that shipped to me, please.
Yes, exactly. Well, you're not going to see it on any WBC stages anytime soon, right? But that's reality, though. Yeah, definitely.
And I think that's a really great picture of the spirit of specialty coffee. Of like, like this is more important right now, and I think this is one of those moments where we can really see, like, everyone's chips are down, and it's like, okay, like what do we really value in this industry? And I think a lot of people are showing that they do indeed value the people, which is something that we all say, but it's cool to see a lot of businesses like really stepping up and trying to show that with their actions as well. So
I know you don't have a crystal ball, and none of us knows exactly what's going to happen, but what do you expect will change, or do you see having potentially already set in as a change for when narrative reopens, as you are biding your time, watching this happen, mulling over values and thinking about the reopening? What's going through your mind as an owner, and what kind of things are you like putting down on paper? Are you planning? What types of things are going on there?
Yeah, I mean, what's going through my mind as an owner of this business, there's a lot. The biggest thing for me is trying to get a sense for how the actual economy itself is going to respond. It's in an ideal world, everything would have just gotten shut down for 3 weeks, everyone would be okay, and then we can just literally press pause on the economy and then pick right back up from where we started. I don't think that's going to happen. I do think that we'll have some measure of rebound. A lot of the techniques that the government's using for stimulus are part of a broader, economic policy development from economists like John Maynard Keynes, and they're all focused on liquidity and velocity of money, so trying to get money moving in the economy again. So when money stagnates, that the economy starts to die, because people are less confident in the economy. So because they're less confident, they're more protective of the money that they do have. So they're less willing to spend it. They put more in savings, and that just slows the overall economy down quite a bit. And so, as much as a $1,200 check that just hits your bank account might help for a lot of people, there are still a lot of people who for wise and prudent personal finance reasons, will hold on to that.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so it's paying attention to that general sense is something that I'm really trying to keep my eye on. Just like, are people going to be okay with going out? And one of the things that I've been fully aware, and I've been anticipating a recession coming. I had scheduled meetings with my bank for getting lines of credit started and getting relationships built there. It's something that we've talked about as a management team multiple times. I think our first meeting where I talked about a potential coming recession was about a year ago, maybe a year and a half. I've actually been preparing and planning for something like this. I wasn't expecting it to happen this way and this fast, but it is something that I've been aware of and trying to think through for a little bit longer than just the virus. So those are all steps that I'd already taken and will continue to pursue. And any federal stimulus that's coming out, you betcha I'm going to take advantage of them as much as I can and use those to put our business in a healthy place where our staff can be taken care of and our people can be taken care of. So those are things I'm looking out for. And then as far as the service model changes go, I'm still not certain how people will respond when everything opens back up again. I don't know if people will be particularly gun shy, and might not want to sit in the coffee bar anymore. And if that's the case, we have a lot of adjustments that we need to do. Our business has been about 80% dine in, so the vast majority of people want to sit in our space and hang out, and they want to have an experience. That's something that I'm aware of and trying to plan for. It's a hard question because a lot of times the space itself is what makes people okay with spending the money on the quality. And at least from my personal experience, it's like I went from a cart serving the exact same quality of products and it was rather slow. And then I opened up a beautiful cafe serving the exact same quality of products and we're like slamming, and I think it's a lot of it's because, if someone's paying $6 for a latte, they want to be able to enjoy it in a nice space and, have a conversation with someone, and they're paying for that overall experience. They're not just paying for just the product. And while, we have to charge that because we're using really high quality milk and high quality coffees, I am a little concerned, I guess, that may not continue on. But, one of the things that I've at least taken a little bit of comfort in is that coffee thus far has been relatively recession proof. It's one of those affordable luxuries that people will continue to support because while they can't take their, $5,000 vacation anymore, they can still spend $5 to have a nice cup of coffee. So my hope is that trend continues if we find ourselves in a recession after the virus has passed and we're trying to get back to our normal lives. But yeah. So those are a few things I'm considering. There's like service implications. Obviously, everybody's going to be much more hypersensitive to cleanliness and overall sanitation practices. So we'll have to continue that. And it sounds like the CDC is suggesting that this may become a seasonal thing, like the flu. So that will require a lot of additional just care and protections put in place until a vaccination regimen comes out that finds to be working and whatnot. So those are all things I'm thinking about. But yeah, like you said, no crystal ball.
Exactly. Well, I mean, those are all things that apply to retail in general, the retail brick and mortar experience, as people, need that tactile response, that visual. And it seems like people will be longing for that, as convenient as it is to get a to-go cup of coffee or a gallon of cold brew, coming into a place where they do have that high quality milk and that service. It seems to me like people are going to fight to regain their own level of comfort to experience those things. And if we meet them in the middle, to say, well, we're going to allay your fears, that we're not just going to like rip the Band-Aid off and say, oh, we're going to stop doing all of our safety protocols as soon as we possibly can. It seems like totally. Walking it back slowly and cautiously is the name of the game.
Yeah, definitely. That's exactly my thought right now is, we'll probably reopen with the exact same thing that we closed with. And then we'll kind of move back up that list of processes that we had established, and once things stabilize. So yeah, a bit of a chiastic response, if you will.
So my last question to you, I suppose, is as you're, bearing the burden of having all of this happen in the midst of this happening to the world, you're in a unique position as an owner. It all kind of stops with you. I wonder if you would speak a little bit to how you are getting through as personally, as an owner, and what you would encourage other owners who are in the same position with from your experience.
Yeah. Nothing exists in a vacuum, I guess. And for this particular season of time, I find myself in a slightly more, I don't have words for it, I guess. Before this all happened, the 3 months prior, starting in December, was probably the craziest time of my life. And then having this happen, it hit everything. And so it's been interesting. Just a quick little backstory. We changed POS systems in January. So I did all the work to get those things changed over in December. We had competition season happening with qualifiers happening in December, where we supported 2 staff members. And then one of my sisters got married in December down in Arizona. So my family, we drove down there and drove straight back up in December. And then obviously, Christmas time and all of that was occurring in December as well. And then we launched the POS in early January. And, that's, if anyone's ever done that before, they know how substantial of an endeavor that is. Mm-hmm. It's like next to launching a food program, that was the biggest thing we've done since we started the business. And on a personal level, our chef is amazing. And she did 100% of the food program pretty much entirely on her own. All I had to do was say yes to the vendors and fill out a couple applications. And she just brought me stuff to say yes to or no to. So the amount of personal work that went in for the POS change for me was the biggest since the launch of the business. And so that was a big thing. And we also launched a bathroom remodel project the exact same week as the POS switch. And that took an immense amount of time. We had a number of problems. Whenever we opened the walls up to put down backer board for our tile, we found that there was a bunch of plumbing problems that weren't documented and they weren't up to code. And that was the one thing that we didn't touch when we built the shop out, because the bathrooms were already permitted. So when we opened up the wall, we're like, oh no, this is not right. And so we had to try to fix all of that in the middle of the night, and so we had, like, my friend who's a contractor did the job for us. And so he took on a bunch of late nights, and the project was supposed to take a week and a half and it took 2 months, because of all the extra problems that were going on. And so that was a very expensive project. It was, it's like, in hindsight, I'm like, man, that money might've been nice to hang on to. Maybe we could have pushed off the bathroom remodel project for a little while, but nevertheless, it was, an interesting thing. And, we had a lot of things that we're doing with that and a lot of water things. So we were trying to, make sure that the plumbing was in good shape. And I was there pretty late one night. It was about 11 o'clock, 11:30. And I'd gone in after the kids went to bed, and I had gotten a phone call from my wife, Julia. And she called me just like frazzled and frantic and in tears. And a pipe had burst in our kids' bedroom. And so our whole kids' bedroom got completely flooded. And so we had to rip out all the carpets and ripped out all the drywall. And all of a sudden I was doing drywall work and painting and all that stuff in my kids' bedroom, and they were out of a bedroom. So they were sleeping in the living room, and all their stuff was in the living room and on our back porch. And so we're going through all that. And in the midst of that, before we had driven to Arizona for one of my sister's weddings, we'd gotten new tires, and so that was in December. And then in January, we had not one, but 2 different flat tires that needed to get replaced from debris or whatever. And so that was just in the midst of all that. And our check engine lights went off. So I had to deal with all that.
Oh my goodness.
And then my church closed down. And that I found out that the last person who was on staff at our church had quit at the end of December. And then by the end of January, I found out that the church was just going to be completely shutting its doors on March 1st. And so there was just an immense amount of emotional and like spiritual strain going on in all that process, and trying to work through that. And I hosted, I like had members from my church out at the coffee bar after we closed, just to like talk through everything. And so trying to go through all that process. And then one of my other sisters got married at my coffee bar at the end of February. She watches my mom as my mom's caretaker, and my mom's disabled. And so when she went on her honeymoon, I needed to go out and take care of my mom. And then whenever I got back, all of the stuff with the coronavirus like hit real serious. So I personally have been at kind of a drained place, and just feeling really exhausted. And so, thankfully, and I have no other explanation for it myself other than that, I believe it's God's grace that I had enough energy to deal with this coronavirus thing in the way that I did.
No kidding.
But, it's like I've been sleeping a lot, just trying to recover since we've been closed. It's like just all of that has just been hugely weighing on me. And, it's really hard to practice hospitality when you're not at a good place, and, you don't have anything left to give, you're completely poured out. So I very much feel like that's, I've been in the process of refilling and trying to go through all that. And, so I've just been working on more music, trying to learn songs and write songs, and just taking more time for that. I've been playing video games, and just,
Nice.
just doing that. I've been hanging out with my kids, playing Frisbee, going on bike rides, like those are all things that I've been doing. I can't make those prescriptive for everybody else, but ultimately, there's a lot of pressure from the like hustler type folks, and business owners. We're entrepreneurs as well. And so a lot of us just have to pay attention to the business industry leaders and all the like leadership gurus and all those things. And everybody's got really strong opinions about hustling and making the most of your time at all times. And that can be a right thing, for many people at a right season. But I do think that the cult of the hustle is not a long-term sustainable thing. At least for me, it's not something I have any desire to be a long-term sustainable thing for me. Anyone will tell you that knows me that I will hustle hard in the moment. And when the situation calls for hustle, I will be hustling. But right now I'm trying to view this as a moment which requires rest, and just kind of being okay with that. And not feel like I have to be out reading a million leadership books and, picking up 15 new skills about being more marketable and all that stuff. It's like I'm trying to make a little bit more space for myself so that I can get refilled and be ready to serve people again, and serve my staff when the time is right. So,
and both options, like you mentioned, could be legitimate for the individual, but not having that guilt from that cult of hustle to say that if you're resting, you should feel guilty for resting, or that you're less than for not trying to get blood from a stone in this, because there's going to be some opportunities in the midst of this crisis, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to give yourself no rest until you find it, or else you need to feel bad about yourself as an owner or an entrepreneur.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing for me, is just that, it's like right now is an interesting time, and there aren't really maybe any right answers. Maybe there are some that are better than others. But ultimately it's about assessing your situation, where you're at, and figuring out what's the course of action from there. So,
yeah. And it sounds like you're giving yourself a lot of grace in the process.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
That's good, man. I'm not glad that Narrative is closed, but I'm so glad to hear you're sleeping and, using this as a refreshing time. And I know that there's probably people are just like, boy, maybe I need to, from hearing this, maybe they'll be inspired to just take a few more leisure hours during the day to use this slowdown as a self-care time too, which could be something they don't give themselves permission to do when business is business as usual.
Yeah. And like, I hope that people are able to do that. I also recognize that like the ability to do that does come with a little bit of a privilege. It's like, if our business had not been doing well last year, I would not be in this place right now, and I'd be a lot worse shape. And so it's like I'm immensely aware of the fact that like, because our business has been doing pretty well as far as it goes, in specialty coffee, it's like that's given me some padding to be able to do this. And I know that that's not the case for a lot of people.
True.
It's like, if there are people who want to rest and they want that break and they just can't do it right now, I see you. I feel for you. If I can help you in any way, like, let me know. Because I get it. And after 2 weeks of relaxing and recovering, I'm feeling a lot more filled again, and I feel more capable and just ready to help again, and able to do that. So yeah. Anyway, that's that.
Awesome. Well, Maxwell, thank you again for taking time to talk through all of this with us. It's immensely insightful, and I appreciate all that you've done to help the industry through being open with your staff and your customers, through your Instagram account, through just the Washington State Baristas Guild's Facebook page. And it's been instructive for a lot of people. And I think what you've shared here has just been in the same vein of helpfulness. So all the best to you, man. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me back on the show.
Well, I hope that the episode spoke to you and that you found it useful wherever you happen to be in processing all of what's happening around us, and wherever you are in your business. And that Maxwell's example of leadership and decision-making has maybe sparked some thoughts and ideas in you for what you're going to do, which that's all what's on our mind right now is like, how do we get our businesses prepared for what's coming? And if anything I could take away from this episode, I think it's the idea that we have to stick true to our values as, being able to show hospitality and care, but do so with the tools of thorough planning, contingency planning, and systems that we execute on. And that's so critical as we consider what's happening and what's going to happen in the future as we are introduced to what the new normal is going to be for coffee shops. So with that said, thank you so much to Maxwell Mooney. And for all of you, thank you so much for joining me on the show again. And I'll see you here later on in the week for another episode focusing on the COVID-19 crisis, from keys to the shop.